We're doing another draft. This one is the best Hearthstone expansions. And when we say best, that means in terms of the metagame, everything that encompasses an entire expansion cycle. Because you went first last time, I get to go first this time.
I won last time, right? Did we determine a winner?
There was no verdict. I could read the comments after that. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. It helps a ton. For my first round draft pick, I'm gonna pick Journey to Un'Goro.
Shit. Oh. All right, okay.
Journey to Un'Goro is arguably the best expansion because that was the first expansion they introduced quests. I think we could all agree that the mechanic of quest is one of the best ones that they've ever introduced. The flavor in that expansion was a 10 out of 10. It had a really great metagame outside of Quest Rogue. We had the Ben Bro rap song, which if you don't know that, which is also fantastic. Great announcement video. I think everything that they did for this expansion was just a 10 out of 10, but it's got dinosaurs, man. It had Adapt, which I thought was really good as well. Un'Goro, I think, is looked back at one of the best expansions, if not the best one, and that's why I'm picking it first. But mainly because of the quest mechanic. That's a 10 out of 10 mechanic.
Okay, well, first of all, I hate you. This is such a good expansion. Oh my god, why couldn't I go first? You know, I always talk about the. Okay, anyway, the worst thing about this expansion was some of the quests were busted. This is when I actually started creating content for Hearthstone, just because I had so much fun and there were so many different decks to play. This was the best.
Good expansion.
This is definitely the best expansion. I know I'm supposed to try and find a flaw with it. You're lucky you went first, buddy.
Just get better. It's a skill difference. The reason why I think quest is such a good mechanic, it takes one card to build an archetype for a quest. They can use the rest of those cards to develop different archetypes, which means there was just so much to do in that expansion. What a good expansion. You got to think about what your first pick is, bro. Like, it can't be over right now.
Yeah, I know. All right. Okay. Well, my expansion's actually better than Journey to Un'Goro. Maybe you've heard of it. Knights of the Frozen Throne. You know, it was very exciting. It had Death Knights, really cool. Hero cards, right? Was that the first time hero cards were implemented? I think it was.
Other than just strictly Jiraxis.
Malfurion the Pestilent and Deathstalker Rexar. I personally think Rexar was just really good. I think everyone looks back on this expansion very, very fondly. Just kind of like the quest. All the hero cards kind of brought their own flavor that you can kind of build a deck around.
Depending on the Death Knight, sure.
Yeah, well, you know, some of the quests sucked, all right? And Journey to Un'Goro, some of them were bad.
And that's completely fair. When you look at the quest, even the Paladin one, right, which was considered probably the worst one other than the Warlock one, you just had to play spells that cast on a friendly minion, right? Jaina, you wanted to build Elemental Mage. Like, you had to kind of build around it much more than a quest. But then you had Malfurion the Pestilent, which was just like God sent in every deck.
Yeah, some of them were just staples. Hold on, my cat is destroying. Does your cat ever just go goblin mode? So, I mean, yeah, Mage, you had Frostlich, Jaina in there, Uther with the Horseman thing. I feel like a lot of people like that. Anduin, I guess Anduin was a bit frustrating at times, but still a really cool archetype. And then we got, you know, other fantastic Blood Reaver Gul'dan.
The hero cards were good.
You like that? You like, yeah. And then we got other fantastic cards that aren't hero cards, such as Morabi.
Great card. Overall.
Great flavor.
Great card. I'm going to say the Frozen Throne expansion was good because it brought a lot of impactful cards that followed Journey to Un'Goro, right? So it had a great metagame to just, you know, come right after. It was perfect. I think a lot of people can argue some classes got absolutely shafted compared to other ones. Shaman was a really good example of that. Shaman was like not good.
Freeze Shaman? You didn't like Freeze Shaman?
It kind of, did you like it? It's not that I didn't like it. It just wasn't really playable. I think what Knights of the Frozen Throne had really going for it is that everyone loves Death Knights. Everyone likes like the ability to just transform into a Death Knight. Like, that was really cool. It had a wow factor to it. But when it comes to the actual entire expansion, I mean, bro, it's not Journey to Un'Goro.
Well, it brought Defile in. Defile's a good
Defile card. Is a good card. Both of the expansions are pretty good though.
Knights is a little better.
You already said that Journey to Un'Goro was the best expansion. You already lost.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. Carry on.
No, I'm surprised he picked Knights of the Frozen Throne second. I don't think it's number 2.
Oh.
This is my second pick. Whispers of the Old Gods is the second one
that
I would have gone with. The thing about Whispers of the Old Gods was it had the huge advantage of the first rotation in Hearthstone. So that was the first time where we saw cards leave, and it led to a brand new metagame that Whispers of the Old Gods basically defined. They did a really good job in terms of making it feel like it was an Old Gods expansion. You weren't around when this expansion came out, right?
I was not, yeah.
The benefit of Whispers, not only was the expansion trailer really good at setting up the tone, every single person who logged in got Cthulhu for free, so there was already a huge thing to be doing into the game. Every archetype was was surrounded by, you know, Cthulhu, N'Zoth, which you said was one of the best cards in the last episode. Yashiraj saw play. Yogg-Saron, even though it was absolutely nutty, was one of people's favorite cards. When you look back at an expansion like that, there wasn't a lot wrong with it. A lot of it was just, let me give you a brand new way to play Hearthstone, to build your deck around, to showcase to you what really powerful stuff can do at 10 mana, because before this, there wasn't a lot of very powerful 10 mana cards. They kind of were hit and misses, and then Old Gods introduced you to the Old Gods, which was the powerful effects that you can build your entire deck around. It didn't feel like any single class was necessarily awful. It was just a really good metagame, but the flavor of this expansion was just like 10 out of 10.
It had good flavor. It did introduce the Old Gods, right? Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't play when this came out, so I mean, I played with the cards. I mean, I've dabbled in Wild. I don't really play Wild anymore. Without Yogg, what would Hearthstone be?
Good point.
I feel like I'm supporting you.
We looked at this the other day. In Google Trends, the most popular expansion based on that was the Grand Tournament, and then we saw a significant downfall because that expansion wasn't great. Whispers of the Old Gods really helped bring the game back. It was a really good set to introduce into the game.
Was TGT a full set?
Yes, it was.
Oh, that was a bad one. I hope that's not on my list.
They learned from that expansion, I'll tell you what. What's your number 2, good sir?
Okay. My number 2 pick, which I'm very confident about, is going to be Witchwood. All right.
No shot.
You don't like Witchwood? I feel like Witchwood was a really good expansion. I feel like it had a really high power level. I think it had a bit of power creep, but it was a lot of fun. Having cards like Mossy Horror just introduced into the game, I feel like was a great addition. I think there were a lot of bad cards, such as, you know, like Duskfallen Aviana or Splintergraft, but I think it's strengthened a lot of current archetypes with Witching Hour, you know, stuff like Dire Frenzy. There's just all these cards that I reminisce on so fondly. I really like it. Even stuff like Tess was introduced with this. Shutterwalk was here. Just all these fun new cards that enabled new archetypes were introduced, and I think it was a good time. I do think also Ungora was still in rotation with this. Since it was a 4-set meta, I think it was just a really good time. I just always enjoy rotation, so I feel like anytime it's a 4-set meta and 5-set meta, 6-set metas tend to be my least favorite. But you don't like the theme of Witchwood? I also like the spookiness, the vibes.
The theme of Witchwood was arguably its saving grace. It was creepy. It introduced that soul adventure, which was kind of fun, and the overall flavor of the expansion was good. But that expansion was arguably not great. The only really key defining moments from that expansion is that it introduced Rush, which you didn't even say.
Oh yeah, that's a given.
Baku and Gen plus Shutterwalk.
Right.
I think if you asked people to name a lot of other cards from that expansion, you couldn't name it because the expansion was just overrun from the previous year. If you compare the Witchwood expansion to Ungoro, Frozen Throne, and Kobolds and Catacombs, the power level of Witchwood was so unimpactful that it barely changed the game. If it wasn't for Gen and Baku and Shutterwalk, that expansion would have been forgotten.
I think I'm a real sucker for the theme. I think that's part of what it was.
Personally think that the theme is great, but I couldn't disagree with you more that this is not a second pick expansion.
Wow.
It's a spicy meatball, I'll give you that.
Hey, it's got Witchwood Grizzly. Remember that card?
It had redeeming qualities, don't get me wrong, but again, if you're coming at me with the power level of cards, they were nowhere near from the previous set other than
They were fun.
that year, the year of the Raven, starting with the Witchwood, was the biggest decline Hearthstone has ever seen. I can tell you one reason why is because of Gen and Baku, which was introduced in that set.
I was, huh? Hello?
What's our win?
Is this
Are you
thing
good?
on? I'm good. I'm alive still. I liked it. I thought it was fun.
I mean, listen,
I thought
it's
we
your
were
draft,
going
man.
from our personal enjoyment of it, you know?
Your personal enjoyment, the general public, I said this at the start, overall flavor, power level of cards, Witchwood would arguably be near the bottom for a lot of people. Again, you might personally like it, and that's completely fair. I think for a draft for second pick, that's questionable.
Is it as bad as N'Zoth?
For second pick, yeah, you probably have done yourself.
Okay, all right.
For my third round draft pick, which I am baffled you didn't actually take, Savers of Uldum. Savers of Uldum, you could probably disagree with me on this one, but when it comes to expansion trailers, that's the best one. It's not even close. Trailer, do you remember it? It's an absolute bob. Overall flavor of that expansion, great. Reintroduced Highlander for a lot of classes, which people loved. Reintroduced the quests, which a lot of people love. I believe you're a huge fan of Unseal the Vault. I think the only problem with that expansion was they introduced Doom in the Tomb right at the end before Descent of Dragons came out, which put like a sour taste in people's mouth. If you don't remember that, it was just like Evolve Shaman over and over again. It was miserable. Yeah. Before that introduction, Savers of Uldum was just really well done. Like the metagame was great. There was so much variety. When you add Highlander back back into the game. It makes classes play a lot differently. It feels like games just don't end up the same way anymore. Really impactful cards. Zephyrus, all of the Highlander cards were great. A lot of the quests did end up seeing play. Like I said with Un'Goro, because they introduced quests, there's just so many archetypes going around that it was great. And you probably remember this. That was arguably one of the best expansions for content creation. Just because there's so much variety going on. This expansion, I think, did a really good job of also getting invested into the characters. Do you remember the overarching story they had for the Year of the Dragon? It was great. They also added the solo adventure, which is escaping my name at the moment, but was also really fun. I'm going too long. This is a great expansion. I can't believe you picked Witchwood.
I can't believe it. I forgot this expansion was in the game. This was my favorite expansion. It had Unsealed Vault, and that's the deck that I've played the most. It's the only time I ever go back to Wild is I go and play Unsealed Vault, because that was my favorite thing. But yeah, for content creation, it was so good. I guess if it's good for content creation, it's also good for content consumption, right? Having Highlander decks for each class, as well as quests for each class, as well as just non-quest or Highlander decks for each class was just huge. Just constantly being able to cycle through all of that. It's also when like Puzzle Box came out. Really fun cards that were just enjoyable to watch. Yeah, this is a fantastic expansion.
That's why I was so surprised when you picked Witchwood second. I was like, he's gonna take Uldum 100%.
See, the way I made my list was I made a tab of all the expansions. Now I have like 100, and it got lost.
Quick cope, it's okay. What
copium? That's how I live.
I can't wait to hear your third expansion. What comes after the Witchwood?
No, I'm scared now. Okay, hold on. I think we've covered the best expansions. I feel like these are like just a tier below. Best ones being Witchwood.
Yeah, absolutely, Witchwood number one.
The next one is gotta be Kobolds and Catacombs.
Oh,
your reaction is more pleasant this time to my ears. Another one that had a lot of flavor, brought a lot of fun cards like King Togwaggle, brought in the Darkness. I know you love the Darkness. It's got Zola in there. I think it just had a really good theme. It implemented a lot of fun new archetypes. We had the spell stones, I believe. We had a good spell hunter with like To My Side. Everyone thought it was going to be like just garbage, a no minion deck, but it was implemented. It was good. We had nice positioning cards here with stuff like crushing walls. We had a lot of fun mage decks, using Aluneth. Everyone loved Aluneth. Being able to play a large variety of decks, including, like Kingsbane and stuff like that. Corridor Creeper absolutely busted. No one saw it coming. I think that was so cool that no one expected Corridor Creeper to be good. Everyone kind of just wrote this card off, and then all of a sudden it was brought into tournaments. It was great. We had Spiteful Summoner decks, which I really had a good time, right? Spiteful Summoner.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No, I hated those those archetypes.
What the heck?
It just felt like whoever played Spiteful Summoner first just won the game.
Yeah, that shit was fun.
I love losing from one card.
As a content creator, you just put in Spiteful Summoner, you put in a big spell in your deck. Doesn't matter what class you are. I think with Warriors, you even ran the Spell Stone, the 7-mana Spell Stone with Spiteful Summoner and a bunch of minions, and then you would just pull a big 7-drop, and it was great. A lot of dragons also. Oh, and Fungalmancer, my god.
Kobolds and Catacombs was a really good expansion in the sense of how powerful it was, because it had to follow Knights of the Frozen Throne, right? So it had to introduce things that were ridiculous. I think my biggest problem with Kobolds and Catacombs is the keyword that they introduced in the game, which is recruit. Problem with recruit is it's like Barnes. Do you remember Barnes? Remember that card?
I do,
remember how people hated that card? Yeah. The problem with recruit is it's literally Barnes, but in a keyword. So you would have games where sometimes you win, sometimes you just straight up lose. Spiteful Summoner was a great example of that as well. You either high rolled or you lost. And when you're coming off Knights of the Frozen Throne, it feels awful sometimes. Now, Corridor Creeper was cool because it really showcases how powerful that set was. There were so many good cards in that expansion that people just wrote that card off like it was nothing. I would have put it higher than the Witchwood, absolutely. I don't know, that's interesting. I don't think I would count Kobolds and Catacombs as necessarily a really good expansion.
I think it was just that year was so freaking good because of Un'Goro and Frozen Throne. I think it kind of just it carried that year and probably the next year. Like that's probably why I liked Witchwood.
Did a video on this basically, which is talking about how the power level of Kobolds and Catacombs was so high that they instinctively made the Witchwood weaker because they didn't want power creep to go that high up anymore. So they made the Witchwood weaker. They needed to reset the power level of cards pretty much. You could look at Kobolds and Catacombs as arguably one of the most impactful sets ever, but does that make it a good expansion? I don't know.
They learned a lot.
They did learn a lot from that expansion.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it was fun, but yeah, I do think that it was more so because it was Year of the Mammoth, and that year was just probably the best year in all of Hearthstone.
It was probably the best. And again, I'm really surprised with your picks because I thought this was going to be a lot harder to go down the list. I'm going to pick Voyage into the Sunken City.
That was a good one.
This is a recent expansion, but it takes a lot from Ungoro in a sense that it felt really good to play. It was following the Year of the Griffin, which was expansions really based on like Warcraft lore, like the turning point in Hearthstone where it felt like the game was a lot more fun. You remember the Year of the Griffin? It made you quit. It wasn't super great. It was super linear. It felt like games didn't really have a lot of pizzazz. Voyage into the Sunken City comes out. We get a rotation. It just felt so good to play this. The Colossals were a huge success. The overall flavor of the expansion was really good. There's a lot of great cards added in this set. The expansion trailer, again, another banger from the Hearthstone team. And there's so many cards that you can name, but I think for the most part, it almost felt like every single deck had a playable option. Once they finally nerfed a couple cards, it felt like Ungoro again, where you could literally play everything. And when you have such a great flavor around it, it was probably a huge success in terms of getting players back into the game. I would call it Ungoro Light.
Really?
The keyword that they added with Colossal was great. And Dredge is such a good mechanic for the game. It's ridiculous. It was a good expansion. Really good expansion.
Well, Year of the Griffin made me not want to play Hearthstone, and probably a lot of other people also not want to play. I think Sunken City did bring me back, and I was just genuinely excited to play Hearthstone again because it was such a good time. Like the meta was solid. This is a really good one. Probably would have been my next pick. I do think like the current meta, I'm not going to talk about Castle Nathria. I think the flavor was great, but I think Sunken City has just been decimated. For the first time in a long time, people were asking me like, oh, what do you think of Hearthstone? I'd just be like, it's good right now. Like, come back and play. Like, Sunken City's great. Castle Nathria came out. I stopped saying that.
Thank you for complimenting every one of my choices, by the way. It makes this
great
a lot
choice.
easier.
Rarran, you're such a smart man. I love
Thank
your
you.
choices. Great choice.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
talking shit on all of my choices.
I mean, I'm just trying to be real with you here. There's some primo coping going on the other side of this call, and it's ridiculous. You have another choice though, Dexter. What's your fourth?
We're digging deep.
There's still some really good expansions, by the way.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I guess that's the draft.
No. Well, we can keep going. I just feel
Sure.
like the rest of them are just not nearly.
Well, what do you got?
good.
What's the fourth pick?
I feel like I guess my next one would be like Scholomance. I think Scholomance was an okay expansion. I don't think it was great. I thought it was really cool to implement the dual class cards. A lot of fun times, messing around with those. The dual class cards was it was really fun. A lot of fun cards like Jandis. I think people actually hated Jandis quite a bit.
I despise that card.
It brought some big decks in, and I like big decks. We had Commencement here, which enabled Big Paladin and Big Warrior, which I just constantly play, and I still cope and try and make Big Paladin and Warrior decks to this day. Brought Fireheart in, which was, I think, just one of the most fun cards I've ever played with. Fireheart was great. Radagor, love Radagor. Probably my favorite big minion of all time. And then a neutral weapon, Sphere of Sapience. Cool.
Yeah, I would say Scholomance Academy was my next one on the list, by the way. You didn't even mention this. Scholomance Academy had a really, really big task of following up Ashes of Outlands because they introduced Demon Hunter. So it was the first expansion we got to see after Demon Hunter was released. And I think they did a really good job. Like, I'm a Warlock player and I hated it because I would just die to Demon Hunter nonstop in that expansion. Every class had a playable deck at some point. There's a lot of really impactful stuff. It was almost like Descent of Dragons of that year. Dual class cards. You didn't mention the keyword. The keyword Spellburst is phenomenal. Yeah. One of the best keywords they've introduced. Lowkeeper Polkelt, I think, is the best design card in a very long time. I love that card. Flavor of that expansion was great as well. Going from like that, like Dread, a lot of really cool designs, like Mizaki, I thought was really interesting. Great expansion. Like, yeah, I feel like that's one that people don't look at fondly, but I think they did a really good job following Ashes of Outland.
I think Ashes was just dreadful. I thought it was really bad. I didn't enjoy it.
It was not great. I think that's what made Scholomance such a good fresh air to the game.
Did Ashes make a lot of people quit? I feel like it did. For like, I hate Demon Hunter.
It brought people back, and then people were like, I don't want to get smarked down, so then I'm gonna not play the game anymore.
Yeah, I think I was on the edge. I was like, I think if the next expansion isn't good, what do I still want to play Hearthstone? And then Scholomance came out, and I was like, all right, okay, everything's fine.
You took the one I wanted.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
But I'm gonna pick an adventure for my 5. I feel like League of Explorers was really good for the game. Obviously, you weren't there for League of Explorers, but this adventure, I should say, with less cards and an expansion, I think was more impactful for the game than almost everything before it because it introduced Discover. It also introduced us to the League of Explorers, Reno, Elise, Finley, Bran. We still see them to this day. Bran Bronzebeard, one of your best cards ever.
Fantastic
still
card.
playable to this day. Yeah, Discover, I think, was what they needed after the Grand Tournament to really help people get back into the game. Discover was such a great mechanic. It had a great solo adventure as well. Phenomenal. Even though it was super small, I would argue that it made a bigger impact than like 80% of the expansions introduced. Added just before Whispers, so I think people kind of forget about it, but really well done.
I didn't play around that time, but a lot of cool cards did come out. I was looking at that one before I last minute chose Scholomance. I think, yeah, Reno Brand, Elise Finley, all great characters. I think that was the best adventure.
I probably should have mentioned this at the start. If Classic was an expansion, I probably would have picked it, but because it was the base game, I didn't count it because the original game was really good. What is your fifth pick, Mr. Dexter? I can't wait to hear what you pick for your fifth one.
I still feel like we're scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, you just picked Scholomance. What do you mean?
A lot of people might disagree with this next pick, Boomsday Project.
Wow, really? You picked 2 expansions from Year of the Raven. That is incredible.
I didn't even like this year, but I feel like I'm looking at the cards, I'm digging through them. I'm like, this is fun. I kind of miss this.
Descent of Dragons, I think, literally deserves at least a spot on this list. I would have probably picked Descent of Dragons too. I think even Castle Nathria, as much as it changed the metagame from Sunken City, deserves to be said.
Really? I feel like it was good flavor, but other than that, I don't.
When you're in an expansion, it doesn't feel nearly as good, right? Because you're in the expansion. When you look back at a lot of the expansions, like I'm sure there were moments in, I don't know, like Savers of Uldum that I absolutely despised, right? Like I'm sure there's moments where I just didn't want to play the game. Same as Scholomance, right? Like there were moments I hated, but like when you look back at it now, it's like there was a lot of good things in that expansion. And I feel like Castle Nathria is going to be the exact same thing. Sure, you see Denathrius a lot and you don't like Theotar as a card. The overall flavor of every single card is phenomenal. There's a lot of great archetypes that they introduced in this set, and kind of like Sunken City with the new development team, it allows a lot of classes to be played. Every single class I think right now has a deck to play. By saying Castle Nathria is garbage, it's just because we're playing in it. Like we said the same thing about Barrens, Stormwind, obviously. When you look back at an expansion and you think of what it actually brought to the game, I think Castle Nathria will be regarded as one of the better ones.
You might be right. Yeah, it's just right now it doesn't feel good. Just like maybe Boomsday probably didn't feel good for a lot of people to play, but like what we had Magnetic here, we had Ziliax, right? I think that was Boomsday. A lot of people were frustrated with just snapping minions onto other minions. Looking at the list of cards now, I'm like, dang, that was a good time. You know, I kind of miss it. We had a Mechathune in there as well. Subject 9, Whizbang, which I think they should just make a core card. A lot of fun mech lists, a lot of fun big lists. Again, I'm a sucker for big decks. Luna's Pocket Galaxy, that was such a card, man. Kangor's Endless Arm. Yeah, I really did like this list. It seemed like there was so many big lists running around. I don't know if that was their intention, make a lot of big things, but I got a soft spot for it. But yeah, we even had Dr. Boom. That was fun. Everyone loved that.
Yeah, it was fun.
Everyone liked that card.
It was a great card.
Yeah, that was a great one.
That entire year, other than the Witchwood, deserves a little bit more credit as well. Like Rostecon's Rumble, as much as it was not a very powerful expansion because the keyword kind of sucked and they made the cards worse, was really good in terms of flavor. There was a lot of interesting cards in that set, right? Same as the Boomsday Project. A lot of the legendary spells were really interesting. I would agree with you that the Boomsday, again, is another expansion I think that deserves a little bit more credit.
You talked about Descent. I was gonna choose Descent because I had some of my favorite cards like Shuma. I just look back so poorly on lackeys.
I also think that Draconic Lackey was one of the worst additions to the game. If they didn't add it, I think Descent would have been a lot better. Descent has a lot of pros to it, right? Galakron, a lot of very powerful effects. It was a crazy expansion. Like it was wild.
It was fun.
Let's just do a quick wrap up here. So my number 1 was on Goro. You pick Knights of the Frozen Throne. Fair to say that it's probably a little bit of a tie, but I think you would probably say on Goro was probably the better one there.
Can we skip the second pick?
Second pick, we have Whispers of the Old Gods, a fan favorite I would mention against the Witchwood. You win some, you win some, you lose some. Number 3, we had Savers of Uldum versus, I can't even remember what you picked.
Was it Kobolds?
It was Kobolds, yeah, Kobolds. For number 4, I picked Sunken City. You picked Scholomance Academy. Overall, I think that's pretty close. They were both pretty great. Lastly, I picked League of Explorers, The Adventure, and you picked the Boomsday Project. Who do you think won?